I'd like to introduce Helen Jenkins. Helen is a 31-year MDRT member, also based in Cardiff, and my business partner. We've worked together 29 years, so going well. So Helen, how vulnerable are we?
Well, Jane, thank you for asking that question. At this moment, I'm very vulnerable, having to work the slides by myself, but anyway, I think if I ask most of us here, when does a client become vulnerable? It's almost like the Harry Enfield sketch, you know, when the teenager on the stroke of midnight hits 13 and becomes a horrible teenager. It's as if vulnerable people on the stroke of midnight, age 75, they become vulnerable. Well, of course, that's a ludicrous thing to think, because the truth is everyone can be potentially vulnerable, even for a short period in their lives. And we as advisors need to recognize this and respond to it. So how do we recognize vulnerability? And how do we know how to respond? Well, I'll introduce you to Bruce, Blake, Texas, and Idea. Now, I know you're saying, who on earth, what on earth are these? But I'll explain that later. But first of all, my first slide, let's see what the FCA guidance is on their definition of vulnerability. So bear with me. Yeah, can you see it? Jane?
You need to open, the slide needs to be open. It's not open. Slide one. Just click on slide
double
one.
Click it. There you
Double
go.
click slide one. That's it.
Got it.
Got it.
Bear with me.
And turn it.
Told you they'd be domestic. Right, is it there now?
Just scroll down. I think, yeah, that's it. We got it.
Got it. Fab. So the definition of vulnerability from the FC point of view is a vulnerable person is someone who, due to their personal circumstances, is especially susceptible to detriment, particularly when a firm is not acting with appropriate level of care. And then they go on to say, we expect that more consumers will be vulnerable in circumstances since the onset of coronavirus, COVID-19, and many of these will be newly vulnerable and or have multiple drivers to vulnerability. So remember the old sort of treating customers fairly. This is almost an extension of that. Okay, so what we as advisors can we look out for which makes the client vulnerable? Well, if you think about it, it's all sorts of things, and some situations can be short-term, but nevertheless make people vulnerable. And here are some situations which show that a client can be vulnerable. Okay. Okay, Jane?
Yeah.
Low literacy skills, physical disability, illness, mental health problems, low income and or in debt, caring, being older, old, being young, divorced, bereaved, job loss, and low language skills. So why then has vulnerability become an issue? And can our dealing or not dealing with it leave us as advisors vulnerable too, if we fail to recognize, understand, and address the issue? So yes, we have a duty to know of and check the vulnerability of our clients, but there are so many other things out there associated with vulnerability. You'll recognize these words. Can you see that one, Jane?
No, you need to double click on it.
It says, I am sharing a screen.
Yeah, you've shared the screen, but not the slide.
Just click it again, Helen, the slide 3.
Slide 3, double click.
Yeah, sorry, girls, people. Okay, it's not coming up. So these words are vulnerability, scam, victim, fraud, detriment, psychological incentives. So the picture has widened really. So even though we initially think these words are not part of our concern or advice, we should be aware of what our clients we can potentially be exposed to. Just think of the bigger picture. So scams. Now we may be aware of the common scams, of which there are many. Prize draw scams, romance scams, catalogue scams, charity scams, pension and investment scams. But people are still being caught out by scammers, and they are more and more inventive and persuasive. Let me introduce you to Albert. Now, Albert is a potential scam. No, Craig, not because he was sold as a cat and has no fur. It's because we're so close to our pets. And these days, when one goes missing, we go to social media to see if it can be found. And this is where the scammers come in, because they know our vulnerability and they contact us to say they found our beloved pet, and for a small admin fee of £5 can release it to the nearest vet. So suffice to say, no pet is found at the vets, and the scammers have our bank details, which they promptly clear. Now, I'm sure we've had clients who call us and say they've had letters from HMRC, you know, should they respond to it? What should they do? So what I'm saying here is vulnerability can open up in so many other areas. Right, Albert, you can go down now. He's done his bit.
Helen, I'll do your slides for you. Just let me know when you want the next one. I'll load them up.
Good idea. So as well as being victims of scams, vulnerability from our point of view can be viewed by the FCA as clients having received poor advice and then poor decisions. So as a result, we're expected to address this, but also have it in our business model. And so slide 4, Sarah, is what the FCA say, please. Firms can expect to be asked to demonstrate how their business model, the actions they take, and the culture ensure fair treatment of all customers, including vulnerable customers. Thank you, Sarah. So how vulnerable are we? So we need to look at slide 5, Sarah, in order to recognize, record and respond. Now, so far, not a lot has been done to address this by advisors. In fact, a recent survey noted 14% of advisors had no vulnerable clients on their systems, 22% did not know if they had any, and the rest, only between 1% and 10% were recorded. Slide 6, please, Sarah. Now, there are, however, things we can do with aids to recognize, record and respond. And this is where Bruce, Blake, Texas and IDEA come into play. Thank you, Sarah. Now, this is a handy desktop document that Jess produced and explains what these things are. So if we can go to slide 7, please, Sarah, which is Bruce. These are suggested wordings to help us recognize vulnerability. So they are behaviors, remembering, understanding, communicating, and evaluate. So behaviors could be look at the things a customer says or does, and they may trigger things, suggest they're struggling to make a decision. Remembering, would it be helpful if I went over that again? Would it be helpful if I put it in writing? Understanding, do you want me to tell you what you've understood so far, and I can fill in the gaps. Communicating, is there another way you'd like us to communicate with you? And evaluate, weigh up the options. Would it be helpful to go through each option again? Do you have someone you normally talk to about these things? Slide 8, please, Sarah. Which is Blake. Breathe, listen, ask, keep safe, and end. It can be hard to hear, so take a moment and acknowledge the customer. I'm so sorry to hear you're not feeling well. How can I help? And then L, listen actively. Always take what the customer is saying as serious. Listen out for signs of immediate risk. Ask to discover, is there anything I can do which will help you now? Keep safe. It may be helpful to speak to someone who may be able to provide you with the right emotional help. Have you thought of speaking to someone? And end with the summary. So before we finish, I can ask, how are you feeling now? And slide 9 is Texas, which is thank, explain, explicit, ask, and signpost. Thank them for sharing. Explain how we're going to use the material. Gain consent. Ask if there's anything you'd like us to do which will help. And signpost. Some of our customers have found it helpful to speak to, and then the internal or external people they can speak to. And then the final one is idea, which is slide 10. So idea is the impact. What does the problem prevent or make more difficult? The duration. When did this first happen? How long has this been going on? Episodes or experience. Is this happening often or is it temporary? And assistance, what help is provided or what help is provided to support you? So these are the words that we can use to help us recognizing the vulnerability. And then if we want to do anything further to actually record what we've done, if you go to slide 11, Sarah. Thank you, is the client well-being checklist. Now this again is available on the Just website and it's very, very detailed, as you can see. But again, is a record of what we've looked at and discussed with the client. So we've addressed the points about recognizing vulnerability, dealing with it and what is expected of us. But equally important is that the following are in place. Slide 12, please, Sarah. So, are the client's wishes known and documented? Wills and trusts, power of attorney, advance decision, which is a living will, and expression of wishes, which often has not been completed. Now, I know there are many of us there. Thanks, Sarah. I know there are many of us there who have this service which we offer to clients and professionals we can refer them to. But unless we discuss these areas with clients, believe it or not, Costco is now offering LPAs. So we can go into our local Costco, pick up our patio heater and the giant Halloween witch, and also do a power of attorney and our wills there as well. I had to check it out when I looked at it, as it came through an email. Would you like to do a POA with Costco? So some clients, however, can be put off by the cost of the power of attorney. So if one is needed at a later stage, then it is a lot more expensive. And Denzil Lush, now obviously sounds like a Welsh name, Denzil Lush. He was, until his retirement, the senior judge in the Court of Protection. And he described a power of attorney as being not perfect, just the best option. And the slide 13 will show the cost. Now, this is showing the power of attorney versus the Court of Protection. The figures may need updating a bit, but we can see the costs of doing a power of attorney now, or if it has to go to the deputyship, then it is not only much more expensive, but also very often we can't choose who the attorneys are going to be. It has to be from the solicitors panel. Thanks, Sarah. So another myth that we need to dispel is next of kin. There's actually no legal basis for next of kin. If your loved one's in hospital and unable to consent to treatment, you have no legal rights to give consent on their behalf, unless certain legal procedures are in place. And there's only one situation when next of kin is legally there, and it is if someone passes away without a will, the bloodline is called the next of kin. So I've stated that close on the heels of vulnerability is financial crime and financial abuse. Now, we're all aware of the scams people hide behind the internet, but some of the biggest number of financial crimes are actually to be from close family or even charities. Now, years ago, if a child was taken into hospital with a bruise, they'd say, oh, the child's clumsy or had an accident. And it took years to recognize that it was often the child abuse was at the hands of a close relative. Now, the same thing is true for financial abuse. You know, granny has dementia, daughter has power of attorney, granddaughter needs a deposit for a house, and granny always wanted to give her money for a house. Now, if we have clients who are vulnerable and the relatives have power of attorney, we must remember that the client is still our client and not the power of attorney, who must act in their best interests. In fact, it was Judge Lush who commented, it's all too easy for relatives or friends to have power of attorney to take advantage of elderly people. So we as advisors look after our clients from the cradle to the grave. But even then, the scammers have one over us. This is the latest scam. The crystal ball. The clairvoyant scam. These scammers target bereaved individuals and involved in very personal communications. They're offering to get in touch the deceased with the loved ones, or they'll give magic potions or products or things which will bring good luck. They say they will contact the deceased for a small fee. And sadly, all too often, these victims have been groomed, built a relationship, and honestly believe at their most vulnerable time that they don't want to end this relationship because of their connection with their loved one. But sadly, their bank account gets cleared as well. So I hope you found this brief encounter into vulnerability helpful, and it's answered some questions about how vulnerable are we, because it should enable us to recognize, record, and then respond. After all, it's not just the over 75s who are vulnerable now. Potentially, it is all of us. And if, Sarah, you look at slide 14, this gives some of the links that we can go on to. And if you take one thing away from the presentation, look at the Just Vulnerability module. When you log on to that, it will take you to a presentation that looks at vulnerability. And you can do the whole presentation and at the end get a CPT certificate. And actually, if you encourage your staff to do this as well, then you will have a document in place showing your firm's record of vulnerability. The desktop flip chart with Texas and Bruce and Blake, etc. Also, the PFS has got a vulnerability task force, which we can look at and be encouraged to be a part of. Age UK have got great fact sheets on vulnerability that we could use for ourselves and with our clients. And there's the Times article about the power of attorney cost compensation. So thanks everyone for listening. Sorry about the slide presentations. Trying to multitask is a bit different. That was my vulnerable moment, but hopefully some of those points and scans have helped you to recognize and record the vulnerable client. Cheers, everyone.